The reason for this book kind of came about. I was actually on this reservation in a conference, and there were like 20 of us from Arizona State University, administrators and mostly faculty, sitting there in a meeting, and one side of the wall was really glass, and I was looking out and really looking out and kind of just zoning out because it was a long meeting. And what I saw was an armored car leaving the reservation, and you can imagine that it was coming from the tribal casino going to a bank. And I thought, how ironic, as I sat there and began to ponder that if you imagine 100 years ago, 100 years, maybe a little more, than the late 1800s, when Indians in population had dropped below 238,000. It was the thought that Indian reservations were Indians too were going to vanish. We were called the vanishing race. So it was the wagons who brought food and supplies onto the reservation, and 100 years ago brought food and supplies to this reservation right here. And 100 years later, in 2013, you see now armored cars leaving the reservation. So the wagon, the vehicle, is really kind of literally turned 180 degrees around, you can imagine. So indeed, it is one of rebuilding, but strategically doing that. And so it's been quite a chore for the Gila Indian Reservation community and other Indian nations too, who've gone into the Indian gaming operations. Here in the Native American community, and there are a lot of Native communities here. In fact, there are 22 different Indian tribes, Indian nations in Arizona. And Arizona is quite a large state because Arizona, in all of its vastness, there's actually the percentage is like 28% of the total land of the state of Arizona belongs to Indian tribes. So you can imagine that, the Southwest, it's a very difficult place to live. As you can see that, there's a lot of desert. It's a very harsh, demanding land. And the interesting part is that Native people have learned how to survive in this area. The first part of it is really the natural resources, because water in particular, but coal, uranium, oil was under their lands. And so in developing those, and it was really a difficult decision because the tribes were faced with, well, how do you and why should you harvest the natural resources of Mother Earth? So went really against much of their philosophies and the relationship with the earth, because they learned to adjust and see themselves as products and coming from the earth, like a mother in that sense. Well, very strategically and good marketing, organization, good leadership, very effective leadership, then they're able to manage their resources. And then you have something else that kind of comes along in beginning in the 1970s. And interestingly, beginning with the Florida Seminoles. So the Florida Seminoles were the first to come up with unregulated Indian gaming. And what that meant was that as other tribes saw them, in particular like the Pequot of Connecticut, then they actually traveled to Florida to see and to watch and to learn from the Seminoles. How did you guys do that in starting an Indian gaming operation, which was actually bingo at the time? Well, the Pequots took these ideas and suggestions back to Connecticut, became a recognized tribe, obtained trust land, which was the former reservation, had it put into trust status, and then began to build a gaming operation, which has since developed into Foxwoods, the largest gaming operation in the entire world. So from that, you have other tribes imitating and using the example of the Florida Seminoles and also the Pequots in Foxwoods. And you have something, what you see behind me right here, is a tribal casino. Now the interesting part of this, in this rebuilding of Indian nations, is that most tribes who enter Indian gaming operations do not succeed. In fact, about 20% of those who go into the Indian gaming operations actually succeed, and out of that 20%, not that many, but several have done quite well, like the Gila Indian Reservation here. So it's really kind of good management, very effective leadership, and really kind of knowing what you're doing in a very different world. In order to start something like this, Indian communities have to actually have trust land. So normally they have reservations, so they have to have a site on their reservations, and sometimes they build off their reservation, but that has to be land in trust status. So you have to have that. That's the first step. And trying to obtain land and put it into trust status is a very long, drawn-out process. And sometimes it's opposed by communities, sometimes it's opposed by even other Indian tribes. But as that's done, after that long procedure, then you have to have revenue. You have to have any kind of resources to start any type of business. Gaming operations that are started in Las Vegas have financial backers. And so there are people like Harrah's, casino operations. They've actually backed quite a few Indian tribes in starting their initial Indian gaming operations. But the interesting part of that is that these financial backers want a clear profit. So whatever that the tribe makes, like for the first year, then they take a certain percentage, like 40% or perhaps even a 60% of the general revenue, while the tribe is left to pay the bills. Security, road construction, the jackpots that are won, everything like that. It has to be paid from money, and so the tribe has to deal with that. And so once they kind of get over the hump of starting building a building, constructing it, and making it something like this. See, something like this would have taken years to develop, and just in design and planning, and starting on a smaller scale, and then building another casino that's even larger. So what we have now in 2013 is actually kind of Indian gaming in like the second era. So the smaller bingos, you don't see them anymore, and you see now larger resorts and even more plush resorts. And the interesting part of this is that tribes are thinking, and they have these casino conventions every year about how to go into electric gaming, because people are now kind of wanting to do gambling in 2 or 3 different ways at once. So they're looking at electronic boards like iPads or something like that, so that they can do 2 or 3 things, bet on maybe 2 or 3 football games or basketball games at the same time. So gaming in itself has kind of gone into another kind of style or way of gaming, and tribes are kind of looking at that too at the same time. The profits that are made when they realize the profit after all the bills are paid, then tribes usually have 2 things that they can do in kind of one way or the other. And one of them is really kind of paying out per capita payments, sometimes in a monthly payment to tribal members. It depends on how many tribal members that they have. That's when a lot of people want to be members of that tribe in particular. Or they can do it maybe in quarters, like the quarters of the year, then maybe every 3 months, then a per capita payment might be made to tribal members. So that's one way. Now the other way is that a lot of the tribes who are successful at gaming take that revenue and they invest it back into the tribe. Scholarships, largely education, because Native leaders realize that education is really kind of the key to the future, and especially for their youth. So they do that quite a bit. Programs for the elderly, programs that are for dental, medical, all kind of things like that. Sometimes going into hotels, sometimes even starting a bank itself. So the Florida Seminoles, for example, have actually purchased the chain of Hard Rock Cafe, except for two franchises of it. I mean, two sites of it. I think one is in London that they don't own, and another one I don't recall, but they actually own the entire chain. So they're looking ahead and seeing what's profitable, and this is Indian capitalism. Indian capitalism in a very different way, I think, from the mainstream capitalism, because it's still kind of a part of the moral economy idea. And the moral economy idea as a concept is one of taking care of the community. That everybody who's a member of the tribe who lives in the community, like in the reservation here, that they're making sure that the Native people who belong to this community have services, health, dental, educational opportunities, so they're taking care of their people. It's much like the state of Arizona or any other state, or even a corporation that you work for, then they would have benefits for that. So Indian gaming tribes who are successful then in turn can provide benefits to their people and take care of them that way. Well, there's always controversy surrounding Indian gaming, and really I think, phrasing that question another way, there's always some type of suspected controversy around any type of gaming, not just Indian gaming. And a lot of the criticism is, well, tribes are making money, but they're making it in a bad way. They're making it at the expense of people who can't afford to gamble. But when you look at that, you can ask the same thing of Las Vegas or Atlantic City or any other place that legalized gambling. And so there's always that type of controversy. There's also rumors, well, that there's organized crime that's involved in Indian gaming. And really, That's been studied and proven that it's not, and that's not to say that there could be, but it's been proven largely that that's a false rumor. So Indian gaming does have its criticisms, but if you think about it, then anything that is successful as an organization, as a program, or even as an individual, there are always going to be rumors or criticisms, of that people who do in fact succeed. When people read this book, what I want them to see is look at the glass being half filled, half full, and not the bottom half, but the top half of optimism that look at the success of tribes in rebuilding their nations. But a little bit more than that, because if you look at the metaphor of the glass, the water glass being half full, let's move it to an indigenous context, an Indian environment like a water gourd. So the water gourd, in which, that was a drinking vessel a long time ago for a lot of tribes, a lot of Indian people, then let's look at the water gourd being half full and look at the optimism and all the positive things, the rebuilding, the triumph over tragedy that Indian nations have done, and you see that. You can also look at some reservations who've not done well, but so often America has looked at the reservations, and from the historic stereotypes, there are 34 stereotypes about American Indians, and all 34 are negative. Historically rooted, but there are also as many as 6 that are neutral, and there are 6 that are positive. So when you think about the history of the United States and American Indian tribes, it's really one in which people came here from Europe and different parts of the world and colonized and tried to vanquish native people who were fighting patriotically. They weren't resisting. Resisting what? Resisting colonization, that it's something positive? No, they were patriotically trying to defend their homelands. It depends on how that you look and frame the question. So in trying to defend their homelands in a very patriotic way, then of course there's this conflict and people who write the history. And the people who wrote the history were largely, non-Indian people, and so that's one of the reasons for this book. Let's look at the water gourd being half filled.